Okay guys, so we're going to carry on our tutorials, the features of music. So far we've dealt with rhythm, and remember we said there are two things you need to make music or to make melody. That is rhythm, first of all, which is how we organize the notes, notes being pitch. So we've looked at rhythm already. We're now going to look at pitch. So pitch is the different notes that we apply to rhythm to make a song or a melody. First of all, you need to be comfortable drawing a treble clef. We've done plenty of work of this in class, but if you want a quick little refresher, you can check out the YouTube video I've attached here. And take your time doing it. Neatness is, of course, very important, and make sure you're using pencil all the time. We don't use pen when we're writing music. Then a quick recap over the lines and spaces of the stave in the treble clef. And this is important, okay? So we're starting off here with the treble clef at the very start of the music. These note names only apply to the treble clef. If there is a different clef there, and there are different clefs, for example, there is a bass clef as well. If the clef is different at the start, then the note names are different. We're talking only about a treble clef here. So we have 5 lines, and as you can see here, these 5 notes here are on lines. Essentially the note is kind of grabbing the line, or the line is going through the center of the note head. And we start from the bottom up. The lowest line is called line number 1, and the highest line is line number 5. So the first line is E, the second line is G, the third line is B, the fourth line is D, and the fifth and final line is F. And they are notes, so if a musician sees a note written on the first line, he or she knows to play the note E. And then the spaces, so if you look at these 4 notes, they are in between the lines. The first space is called F, the second space is called A, the third is called C, and the fourth is called E. And like the word face is spelt out there, which is a handy way to remember the names of the spaces. And for the lines, we have E, G, B, D, F, a sentence such as every good boy deserves fruit is a good mnemonic to help you remember the names of the lines. You will get used to them anyway as we go along, and you can make up your own line as well. I know different people have different ways of remembering the names of the lines. And this is a game we played in class. Identify the names of the lines and the spaces without them written in underneath. Then the stave is a little bit limited in that we only can put 9 notes, 5 lines and 4 spaces on it, but we may want to play notes that are not quite on the stave. If we want to go below the stave, as you can see here, we have the note D in the treble clef, so that's underneath the first line. If we want to go a note lower than that, we have the note C, and I'm looking at the first line here in the ledger lines page. So you can see for that note C, we've got the semi-breve with a line going through it, as if there was another line below the first line, but it's just the width of the note, or slightly beyond the width of the note. So it's like a temporary short line. And then underneath that, if we draw a note underneath that line, we get the note B. Note that the line above the note B, the temporary or the ledger line that we put in is exactly the same place as where it was for the note C. We just moved the note. The line is always constant. It's always in the same place. And moving down below that, we're creating a second ledger line below that. And if we put a note on that second line below the stave, we get the note A. And by the same idea up above, the note sitting on top of the stave is a high G. I call it high G because, as you know, we have a G on the second line of the stave in the treble clef. If I move above G and I add in a 6th line, but again, it's not the whole length of the stave, it's just the length of the note. And I put a note on that line, we have the note A. Again, keeping that line in the exact same place for the next note, and we're placing the note higher. The line never moves, just the note. We get the note B. And a second ledger line or temporary line above the stave with a note on it is the note C. And again, I gave you a handout in class. You can have a look at these 2 exercises, fill in the ledger line names. We're now going to construct what we call a major scale. It's important when we are learning how to compose music that we know what notes are going to work, that we're not just randomly selecting notes. So we're looking at what we call 1 octave of a piano here. And you can see there are white notes and black notes. So the first note here is C. The note furthest to the left is C. And again, if you've played piano before, you will be familiar with this. The next white note beside that is D. follows the alphabet all the way up to G, and when we get to G, we go back to A again. So the white notes are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. You will notice that in between some of these white notes, not all of them, but in between some of them, most of them in fact, we have black notes. So in between C and D, we have a black note that's called either C sharp or D flat. It has two names. So C sharp, the sharp sign looks like the hashtag sign on your phone. And D flat, the flat sign is like a small b. And basically a sharp raises a note by half a tone or a semitone, and a flat lowers a note by a half a tone or a semitone. So if we raise C by a semitone, we get C sharp. If we lower D by a semitone, we have D flat. So it's what we call an enharmonic note. It has two names. Same thing happens in between D and E. If we raise D by a semitone, we get D sharp. If we lower E by one semitone, we get E flat. There is no black note in between E or F. Now what that means is if we raise E by a semitone, we don't call it E sharp, although technically you could. We call it F. Or if we lower F by one semitone, while we could say F flat, we more commonly say E natural. There's no black note in between E and F. The same thing happens in between B and C. There's no black note in between B and C. The pattern then stays the same. In between F and G, you have F sharp or G flat. In between G and A, you have G sharp or A flat. And in between A and B, you have A sharp or B flat. Then no black note in between B and C. So basically, they are the one octave of notes on a piano. To construct a major scale, now this is extremely important. A major scale is, you might know it as do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Now we're going to look at what we call the scale of C major here first of all. And it's important that you understand what notes work with other notes. This is why we're doing that. We're not just randomly learning about notes on a keyboard. Any of the notes in the major scale will work well together when you're writing a melody. So it's important to know what notes work in different major scales. So we're starting off by looking at the scale of C major here. Now the construction in terms of tones and semitones is the same for every single major scale. You pick your starting note. So I'm going to start on C here. This is the easiest scale to write, major scale to write. So we're starting on the note C. The second note in the scale of C is D, which is a tone higher than C, or a whole tone, hence the W there, whole tone. If there was only a semitone, we would write H, a half tone. So C to C sharp or D flat is a semitone. C sharp to D is another semitone. Put the two of those together and we get a whole tone. So C to D is a whole tone. If we only went up one half tone from C, we get C sharp, or you call it D flat. And the major scale works up in whole tones with the exception of in between the third and the fourth note, which is only a semitone, and the seventh and eighth note, which is only a semitone. Now, no matter what scale you're writing, if it's a major scale, that follows that construction. So if, for example, we were playing the scale of G, the first note would be G. You always start on the what we call the tonic note, or which is the name of the scale. The second note is a whole tone higher. So if you look at the keyboard on the right hand side, a whole tone, which is two semitones, or up two notes if you like, up from G is A. G to G sharp being one semitone, G sharp to A being another semitone. Two semitones equals one whole tone. So the first two notes on the scale of G would be G and A. Again, this is only meant as a quick tutorial. The bulk of this work is done in class, where we spend more time looking at this. So let's write a different scale now. Scale of F major. So all major scales move up in whole tone steps except between the third and fourth notes and the seventh and the eighth notes. Let's now construct a scale of F major. We will write our scale in crotchets, quarter notes. Now, one thing to point out here, the software I'm using here, when you put a note in, it automatically fills the rest of the bar with rests. Just put in one note at a time as we go along here. Don't worry about filling the rests. So we're in 4/4 time, treble clef at the start. The first note is F, which is the first space. F, A, C, E are the four spaces. So we're starting off on the first space there. The next note after F is a whole tone higher. So if we look at F, there's the note F on the keyboard of the piano. A whole tone is the same as two semitones or two half tones. So one half tone up from F is F sharp or G flat, and another semitone up from that is G. So I've gone up two semitones or one whole tone. So G is the next note. The third note is a whole tone higher than the second. So a whole tone up from G is A. The fourth note is a half tone higher than the third note. So there's the second note is A. So a half tone up is A sharp or B flat. In this case, we refer to it for B flat as B flat. The fifth note is a whole tone higher than the fourth note. So B flat up one semitone or half tone is B, and another one is C. That's where we get a whole tone from. The sixth note is a whole tone higher than the fifth note. So the sixth note, by the way, at this point we've reached the top of the octave. We go back to the start. So a whole tone higher than C is D. Because C to C sharp would be one semitone or half tone. C sharp up to D is a tone. The seventh note is a whole tone higher than the sixth, so E. And finally, the seventh and the eighth, there's only a semitone between the seventh and the eighth note. So E to F. F is the next note there. Okay, we're only going up a half tone. The last note in the major scale will also be the same as the first note. And then finally, the flat sign that we put in there to the left of the B, the third line there, should really be written at the start of the piece. So what I've done there is I've moved the flat sign to the very start of the piece, which means that any musician now knows from this point onwards, when I'm playing this piece, all Bs are actually B flats, which is a different note. It saves us writing a flat sign every time we have the note B. And essentially what this means, guys, is those 8 notes that you see there, F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, and finally F again an octave higher, when you're writing your melody, and if it's in the key of F, these are the notes that will work well or strongest in your melody. Well done. Okay, your prep is to finish writing out the scale of G major. G major, so starting on the note G, also ending on G. Good luck. Well done.